NSA and the intelligence community in general is focused on getting intelligence wherever it can by any means possible that it believes on the grounds of sort of a self-certification that they serve the national interest. Originally, we saw that focus very narrowly tailored as foreign intelligence gathered overseas. Now, increasingly, we see that it's happening domestically. And to do that, the NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them for periods of time, simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to achieve these ends.
All right, we are back on the Steve Malzberg Show. That is, once again, Edward Snowden, the leaker of the information regarding the NSA programs, the telephone records, and everything else that we've learned about over the past few days. Joining us now to talk about this with us is Jeff Jacoby, a man I haven't talked to since my previous incarnation at WOR Radio, which was a while ago, Boston Globe opinion writer. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Steve, it's great to talk to you again. How have you been?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
What are we going to do to get you on the air here in Boston?
What's that?
How are we ever going to get you back on the air here in Boston?
Well, you know, we have an affiliate relations department. Believe me, we're working on it. We're working on it. But, you know, we are also on XM Radio 244 if you're driving around in your car.
I know, but for those of us who aren't driving around
well,
or who don't have satellite in the car.
I know. Well, listen, I appreciate that. I do. We're trying, believe me. But let me ask you this. You know, I read today that both Glenn Beck and Michael Moore said that Edward Snowden is a hero. Where do you fall on this?
I think there's a lot of craziness that goes on here. Look, I have a strong libertarian instinct. I cherish American liberties and freedoms as much as anybody else does. But we're in a war. We're in a war with enemies who use tactics like terrorism. People who live in Boston have had particular reason in recent months to be reminded of just how lethal and virulent those tactics can be. Every time a terrorist attack takes place, there are complaints afterward, why weren't the dots connected? And now it turns out we're learning more about what is being done to collect some of those dots. And people are saying, whoa, 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 no dot collecting. We'll hold you to blame if you don't connect the dots after an attack takes place, but we're going to scream and yell about what's necessary to collect them in the first place. I understand the concern, but, you know, I was a strong supporter of the Patriot Act. I remain a supporter of the Patriot Act. To me, it seems crystal clear that when you are in a war with an existential enemy, to say we're going to do nothing that will make people uncomfortable if they know every detail about it is foolhardy. So, you know, I don't like the idea that we live in a world in which this kind of data has to be collected, but I have a lot of confidence in the underlying strength of Americans' commitment to freedom to realize that this is the world that we live in. You've got to collect these dots before you can connect them. And I'm glad that it's come out so we can have a discussion about it. But in the end, I want the United States to be able to fight this war with 21st century tactics since we've got we've got enemies that are using these same tactics against us.
Absolutely, but see, I think there are different distinctions to be made here. I think I want to keep us safe as well. I don't like the fact that the president will say, hey, you know, you can't have 100% privacy, and hey, you can't have this, and he's right. However, he ended the CIA interrogation. He ended the ability to take a terrorist who might know something and blow smoke in his face, deprive him of sleep, and put his head underwater to say, where's the next attack, pal, or you'll get more of this. That we can't do, but we can infringe, you know, we can monitor everybody's phone call, and you got to live with that. See, I don't like the inconsistency. And we got to close Gitmo and send these people free, knowing that the recidivism rate will be X amount. That's okay, but, you know, when it comes to you Americans and your civil liberties, there are some limitations, and I agree with that, but you got to go all the way, not halfway.
You know, Barack Obama is first and foremost a politician, and he's interested in power. And when it was to his political advantage to denounce what was done under the Bush administration, when it was to his political advantage to say you can't have the warrantless data mining because that poses a false choice between our freedoms and our liberties, that's what he did. Now that he's president and he wants to be able to make use of those tools, he gets up and he says, we don't have to choose between We've got to make the balance between freedom and liberty. If you're talking about this particular president and the tactics that have characterized his administration, it doesn't surprise me that he'll say one thing on Monday and something completely different on Tuesday. But if we're talking at a larger level, if you and I are having a conversation about what the United States needs to do to keep itself safe, then I don't see that somebody like Snowden is a hero unless there's something serious going on over here, some serious form of abuse that has not yet come out, that we haven't yet seen any evidence of, that has yet to be revealed. It seems to me this is a guy who had access to a shocking amount of confidential information, who took an oath to keep that to keep it confidential in the defense of his country, and who now holds himself out as some kind of hero of civil liberties while running off to China. Yeah. China is, he's going to hang out in a country where they don't have elections, they don't have freedom, they don't have First Amendment, they don't have a Bill of Rights, and that's where he's going to be to hold himself out as a hero. With all due respect to Beck and the others, I don't see this guy as a hero.
Yeah, well,
I don't doubt that he's got his issues, but people who are quick to proclaim themselves heroic are exactly the kind of people that you should sometimes
absolutely.
be the most skeptical of.
And as you said, I mean, there are other options. You go before this one, you try to get an audience with that one in Congress, whatever. You don't run to the media first because you believe that the people have a right to know, and you believe the people have a right to decide. Starting to sound like Chris Christie, that people have a right to send their senator to replace Frank Lautenberg, not me. Anyway, that's another issue. But
we should also say here, I think talking about the Obama administration, so much of the reaction. Granted, we live in a world in which everything is political. A Republican president does something, the Democrats scream. A Democratic president does something, the Republicans scream. That's kind of built into the system. But what we've got with this president and with this administration is this latest thing that comes on top of all the scandals in recent weeks that have already given so many voters who were inclined to give Obama the benefit of the doubt reason to be concerned, reason to be suspicious. Yep. Well, you and I can talk, and we can explain how the data mining and the NSA program doesn't actually listen in on people's phone calls, doesn't actually read people's emails. But when it comes to James Rosen, that is what they were doing.
Yep.
When it comes to the FBI, to the IRS investigation, they were indeed focusing right in on the most private, personal information about people's beliefs and people's attitudes. They've lost a lot of credibility, this administration, and if that hadn't been the case, I think that there would be a different, at least initially, a different reaction.
Absolutely, absolutely. It all has to be taken in light of what we know about the Justice Department with Rosen and others, and the IRS, and it's all taken in that context. You can't just single this out. You have to say, as I believe Mike Rogers asked on CBS Face the Nation, do you trust this administration to have your phone records? I mean, without abusing them, and that's a good point. I want to move on. We're talking to Jeff Jacoby, the op-ed writer for the Boston Globe here on the Steve Malzberg Show. I want to ask about the Senate race. I alluded backhandedly kind of to Christie and what he did here in New Jersey, or in New Jersey, I shouldn't say here. I live in New Jersey. I'm in Manhattan right now. Nonetheless, there's a special election going to take place in the not-too-distant future to replace John Kerry,
right.
Gomez and Markey, and we've had Gabriel Gomez on this show. The latest poll I saw that came out Friday, I think, was a dead heat.
Well, there's a poll that's out today that's got it down to a 7-point lead, so single digits for Markey. This is coming from Suffolk University here in Boston, which is very well respected in its political polls. And what's interesting, I mean, this is a perfect segue from what we were just talking about. The head of the guy who conducts these polls says that, I mean, the language that he uses is the normally solid terrain that a statewide Democrat traditionally enjoys in Massachusetts has become a little muddy, and if these privacy issues continue, that footing could cause Markey to sink further. Something in the last 40 years, only once has a Republican been elected to the U.S. Senate for Massachusetts, and that was when Scott Brown won the special election to succeed Ted Kennedy in January of 2010. Special elections are weird political creatures. They're not usual. They're not normal. Interest levels are usually much lower. Turnout is usually pretty low. The dynamics are weird. It's the only time in 40 years that a Republican managed to get elected. Whether Gomez can pull it off or not, I don't know. I haven't seen anything quite like the excitement that there was when Scott Brown ran in that special election. On the other hand, all this stuff going on in the Obama administration and the Democratic nominee this time around, Ed Markey has been a member of Congress for 37 years. There's a certain sense, I think, among at least a lot of non-hardcore Democratic voters that that he's a creature of the system, and to the extent that the system smells worse and worse with each of these scandals piling on top of each other, I think it does erode his support a little bit. I would say if you were going to lay down money on the
you go with the favorite.
You still have to bet that the Democrat would win.
Right.
But we've still got a few weeks to go, and as I say, anything weird.
Right.
In the weird dynamics of a special election, anything can happen.
And it's motivation. I mean, the average person who might vote in a presidential election or November election might just stay home, and the people who are motivated to make a change or really care, independents who I know play a large part in Massachusetts, they might come out. It might be good for Gomez. You never know. All right, let's one other piece that you wrote about a week ago, and it's funny because I was just talking about this the other day. There was a piece on Nightline trying to legitimize polygamy. And naturally, it led me to the slippery slope, and it led me to what we're awaiting this month, the two decisions on DOMA and Prop 8 from the U.S. Supreme Court. And I brought up Sonia Sotomayor, of course, as I did at the time when she said it, asking the question about that slope and where do you draw the line if states allow, 2 men to marry, 2 women to marry? What about 3 women and 1 man or vice versa and all that kind of stuff? And I said, that's not me saying it, so you can't call me a name and call me a homophobe or whatever. That was Sonia Sotomayor saying what I had been asking for years leading up to this point. And you write about it so eloquently in your piece. How far does marriage equality go? And I truly believe that once you say yes to the redefinition of marriage, then you say yes to the redefinition of marriage, and it doesn't stop there.
I don't understand why. I understand why people will say it, but I don't understand why people can believe that if you're going to take a social institution that has always had 3 fundamental core irreducible elements. Marriage has always been defined as whatever else it might have included. It always had these 3 elements. 1, man and woman. 2 people. 3, they couldn't be extremely close relatives. If you're going to say it's no longer fair to stick to one of those elements, so let's get down into the guts of we'll open up the hood, we'll get down into the engine, we'll tinker around, we'll totally reopen one of those elements for redefinition because there's a large group of people that think that's appropriate. Why in the world would you think that another large group of people isn't going to materialize in the wake of that to say, we've got another piece of that definition that we want to change? There is now, Steve, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners know, but those who don't, can go on the line and shock themselves by finding out just how advanced it is, a huge and growing movement now in favor of legalizing plural marriage, legalizing polygamy, legalizing what they call polyamory. There's a court case underway in Utah right now challenging the law in Utah against bigamy. The ACLU has a position opposing any laws that criminalize polygamy. If you think that the redefinition of marriage will stop with one group's interest, I think people are deluding themselves. And the interesting thing was the reaction that I got to this column.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's interesting. Half the people wrote and said, "This is just slippery slope, scaremongering, right-wing, nonsense. Next thing you know, you'll be talking about, dogs and horses mating in the street and all the rest of it." The other half, equally vehement, condemning the column and saying, why should there be anything wrong with polygamy? Why in the world shouldn't it be lawful? Why should you have to stick to some one traditional definition? Why, what makes your definition any better than ours? You'll see. It is not going to change. Listen, I remember once being on the BBC several years ago already. There was a case in Germany. An adult brother and sister wanted to get married. And far from being just dismissed out of hand as a completely ridiculous idea, the BBC had me come on one of their shows to talk about it. These things don't, it's an old conservative mantra. Ideas have consequences. When you start saying that there's no core definition of marriage, that anything is up for redefinition, if you can cast it as a step in the direction of equality, if you can say that it would hurt some people not to make the change, that will happen. It's not going to stop.
And by the way, Jeff, you praise, you applaud Sonia Sotomayor for bringing that point up. I do too, and I did too. But I don't think when push comes to shove, it's going to matter how she votes. I think she's going to vote the other way.
I agree, and it could be. I mean, maybe we're deluding ourselves. You know, it could be that she was just doing what the justices sometimes do during oral argument, which is raise a point for, for
the sake of
raising a point, to give the other side.
No, but Jeff, to me, here's what it is. It's the argument is always, when you say you can't redefine marriage because it's between a man and a woman. It's who are you to say that two people who would love each other can't get married? Who are you to say? So then when I say, okay, how about 3 people or 2 people or 3 people or 4 people? Then they say, oh, that's ridiculous. And I say, whoa, who are you to say? And it's that same slippery slope that lets Mayor Bloomberg and everybody mandate motorcycle helmets. You can't have fatty food or sugary food. Why? Because we pay for it. So by that slippery slope argument, you could mandate anything because if you get sick, we pay for it. It's very dangerous.
And the same people who will say to you now, oh, don't, come on, adult incest, legalizing the marriage of brother and sister, that's disgusting. Who could ever be in favor of a thing like that? And then you just roll the clock back and you remind them of what people said about same-sex marriage 10, 15, 20 years ago with the exact same language.
Yeah.
You mean to tell me that people public opinion would dramatically change on that part of the argument, and it's going to remain frozen forever on the other part? You don't think that the dynamics work on more than one level? I think people are fooling themselves badly.
Well, good column, and everybody should go to thebostonglobe.com/opinion and or just Google Jeff Jacoby. Jeff, pleasure talking to you. I hope we'll do it again soon.
Me too, Steve.
Thank you.
Very
Take
much.
care. Jeff Jacoby, the Boston